Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Startup Atlanta webinar. My name is Jen Singh, and I am today's host of our webinar today. So I'm very excited because today kicks off our Scale in ATL webinar series. Each quarter, we're going to focus on a topic that is critical for scaling your business. And today we're focusing on the topic of talent. And we're joined by three fantastic panelists who are going to share their perspective on the topic. And before we dig in and meet our panelists, I did want to introduce a little bit more about Startup Atlanta. Startup Atlanta is a community nonprofit focused on connecting and growing and promoting our local Atlanta ecosystem. We have a variety of resources that we offer up the community, including the Atlanta Startup Ecosystem Guide. This is an online digital list of all the different resources that are available for entrepreneurs in our local region. We include a list of support organizations, accelerator programs, investors, events, and more. And you can find it all on the Startup Atlanta website. We also recently launched our community calendar, which aggregates all the startup events that are happening across the local ecosystem. So you can go on to startupatlanta.com/events and find any events that are happening this week, next week, and into the future in one central location. So if you're a community member, I invite you to go and look and see what's happening. And you can even see more details and register directly from our website. For organizations that host events, we also invite you to share the details and post your events on the calendar. It's open to everyone to participate. As I mentioned earlier, today kicks off our Scale in ATL webinar series. We're going to have another one of these webinars on May 24th, focused on alternative capital. So save the date because we're going to be talking about things like grants, loans, and tax incentives that are available for companies like yourselves. And I also have to say a very special thank you to our sponsors. Startup Atlanta is a nonprofit primarily run by volunteers. And we run based on the support of companies like the ones listed here on the screen. I want to say a special thank you to our presenting sponsors, Invest Atlanta and Google Cloud. Thank you all for what you do to make and support the startup ecosystem here in Atlanta. So now we'll get into the content of why we're here today. We are going to be focusing on the topic of talent, especially the state of the startup talent in the Atlanta metro ecosystem. We're going to be talking about recruiting, retaining, and developing the talent that you need to grow a successful business. And so I'm really excited because we have three fantastic panelists who are going to share very differing experiences and perspectives on the topic. But before we dig in and meet our first guest, I want to mention a few housekeeping items. First of all, you've probably noticed that the session is being recorded. We are going to post the recording on the Startup Atlanta website and our YouTube channel later this week. So if you want to go back and re-listen or share these insights with other folks, it will be available there. We're also going to take questions at the end of today's session. So within Zoom, you will notice the Q&A box. So as we go along, feel free to start dumping your questions into the Q&A chat window, and we'll get to them at the end of today's session. We should have about 10 to 15 minutes to answer your questions, and you don't have to wait until the end to start listing your questions there. Well, fantastic. At this time, I would like to invite our very first panelists to join us to talk about the current state of the market. So I'm going to invite Jane McCracken on video. Jane is the Chief Growth Officer at Core Team, a nationwide professional search and staffing firm. Jane is also a board member, investor, and advisor to startups and other fast growth companies. So Jane, welcome.
Well, thank you. And it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. And boy, are we living in interesting times. I think you could probably say that about every year we try to grow a company in, but it is very interesting. And despite some of the other headlines that have been occupying our news feed and certainly many of the thoughts for people who are on this webinar, the jobs report was released last week. And it's still demonstrating that this year our economy is off to a very strong start, despite the fact that we are seeing a bit of a slowdown, increasing interest rates, and certainly growing inflation. But nonetheless, more people are entering the job market, and the labor market remains quite robust. And that it remains that for startup companies too. So that's the overall general theme. I think a lot of people see that some of the larger tech companies are laying off, and therefore they think there's a looser job market out there, but we aren't seeing that, particularly for people with the kind of domain expertise that startups need to hire. The job market is still very tight. What we are seeing is that the interview process is taking a little bit longer. Interviews and the people involved in them are a bit more deliberate. They are a bit more intentional in how they're hiring. They're not feeling near as rushed as they were last year. On the other side of the fence with the candidates, we are still seeing that they want those salaries that they got used to earning last year. And certainly because of inflation and some of the increased pricing that people are seeing, they're expecting salaries that are going to be able to help them afford to live. That's just kind of a general overview of what's going on. I'm pleased to say that the talent is there. There are lots of people that want to work with startup companies, but the process is a lot more intentional. It's a bit more deliberate in how everybody's thinking. So the more you've thought through your hiring processes and your sales pitch that you're going to give to a candidate on why to join your company, that's going to be really, really important, because it's still a tight labor market out there. People have jobs to choose from. On average, particularly for jobs in the tech sector, it's taking people are landing a new job within 2 to 3 months of being laid off. So that's still an indication that the labor market is pretty tight.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, there's certainly a lot of headlines out there that paint more of a doom and gloom kind of perspective about what's happening across tech. So it is interesting to hear that the labor market is still pretty tight, and especially for certain roles. Yeah. Do you want to expand a little bit around particularly what are those roles where we're seeing high demand and where it's a bit more competitive, especially for potentially a startup looking to hire some of that talent?
Sure. I think any of the engineering type roles, software development type roles, again, where particular domain expertise is needed, those remain very competitive. When you turn to people who know how to build out that sales and marketing pipeline and who have experience of having done it and done it successfully, again, that can be a bit competitive. People who have skills that are more generalized, perhaps some of those roles are not as competitive, or the labor market is not as tight for some of those roles. But again, what you're seeing are, and especially with some of the recent headlines regarding Silicon Valley Bank, and of course, the layoffs going on at some of the larger tech companies, candidates are being very select and want to feel very secure about the company they're going to be joining. So that's some other things that we're seeing out there with regard to candidates and their roles.
And that makes sense. And so when we look at those candidates, I think you've mentioned a couple of things already that they're looking for. They're still interested in those higher salaries. They
Mhm.
want a sense of security about the company. What else is really important to them? I mean, there's a lot of discussion around, work from home, benefits, values. What are some of those core things that candidates are top of mind right now?
Well, let's touch on three things. The first is that most candidates today really want to join a company that will give them purpose. Believe it or not, 75% of people, the work they do gives them a sense of purpose. But when you flip that question around and ask them, are they fulfilling their purpose through the work they do? Only 20% of the people respond to that positively. So there's a disconnect, and companies need to show employees how they're going to make a difference, how what they do matters, and how being a part of the team is really going to help grow a company, and that person is going to make a good contribution towards that. So really for the company to embrace its mission, vision, and values and wrap those up into all their human capital decisions. That's very important because candidates are out there seeking purpose in who they work with. The second thing, people are still seeking flexibility. This could come in terms of the time they show up at work. A lot of it is not around, do I want to come in or not come into the office? But some of it is they're seeking flexibility about when they come into the office and how frequently. A lot of companies are doing the 3-2 model, 3 days in the office, 2 days away. Some people are still embracing remote working, but I think what we're finding out is to really have meaningful and impactful collaboration, that's very difficult to do when you're not together in person. And so most candidates and the roles they're filling have got to kind of understand to really succeed both in your personal career and for the company to succeed in its goals, there's got to be a little bit of give and take. And there is going to need to be some of the work that you do has to be done in person. We're not necessarily seeing a huge amount of companies insisting on 5 days a week, 9 to 5 back in the office. People are embracing the idea of flexibility. And the final thing is that when people are coming back to work, they need to come back for a reason. So making the experience of being in the office a very good experience, a reason for people wanting to come back, you need to focus on it. It used to be everybody focused on an away day and making it incredibly experiential. Well, now we have to make being in the office experiential. And so that's another thing that companies can do that kind of gives candidates and gives their employees a purpose and a reason for coming in every day.
That makes a lot of sense. And are you seeing anything, maybe any differences between other markets and the Atlanta market? And then to add on to that is, are candidates from outside of Atlanta interested and attracted to coming here right now?
Okay, well, the short answer is the Atlanta talent market is seen outside our city is very strong and certainly very diverse. And for companies looking to add that kind of talent, Atlanta is a great place to be. We also have a reputation for being, our companies for being capital efficient. And I think our employees are too. Our cost of living is lower. We have a very lovely community to live in. And so all of these things continue to be attractive to companies who may seek to move here because of the talent that's here. And for people who are considering working for companies in the Atlanta area, it's a great place to relocate to. So, I think Atlanta has a lot going for it, and long may it stay that way.
That's great to hear, because I think we're all very positive and bullish about the talent that's based here. So let's focus specifically on startups, right? And small businesses. One of the challenges is these are very lean teams. Some of them are hiring for the first time, maybe can't be as competitive on a salary basis and perk basis versus large tech companies. So what are some tips or resources that startup founders can use to either get in front of the right talent or help, differentiate when they're looking to hire versus other companies that might be in the market?
Well, I go back to the discussion around purpose. And the more you create that collaborative team environment, all moving towards a single common purpose to grow the company, and helping all the employees understand how important it is that they make a positive contribution to that forward progress. That's very important. So again, the more you sit down and figure out your mission, vision, values, the more that you translate the roadmap you're pursuing to grow your company, the more you communicate that with employees, it becomes very, very important. So communication, living your purpose is important. The other thing is, I noticed with a lot of startups, the interviews tend to focus on domain expertise and then literal experience of having been there and done it. Those are qualities you definitely have to interview for, but you do need to spend time digging deeper and look for the personal attributes that you're seeking in a candidate that they can bring to a team. Whether it's they're a self-starter, whether it's they're a team player, whether it's just they're fun to be around and want to collaborate and cooperate. You've got to interview for some of those qualities. So you've got to dig down and bring out some of the personality traits in a candidate while you're interviewing. And so you can't just hire for domain expertise alone.
That's fair. And then going back a little bit more on that compensation question.
Sure.
So are there other things that you recommend to maybe your clients or startup founders that they can utilize to compete? Like, what's your view on offering equity or, stock options or other pieces that have potential monetization value and might help sweeten the deal a little bit and compete versus those larger companies?
It's a great question, and it's a complex question, because if you are hiring for a competitive position where there are lots of people in the market hiring for the same position, data science, certain software engineering skill sets, you're going to have to offer a competitive package to the employee. But if you are interviewing for people who have a great deal of interest in working with a startup, where their individual contribution might be more effective and felt than in a larger company, those are some of the benefits they're going to get from working with a startup company that go above and beyond just a salary. There are other things you can do too. Many companies work with professional employment organizations, groups like TriNet and Insperity and Gusto, to offer kind of the basic benefits package to keep them competitive with larger companies. But then there can be other things that you can do. You can look and see how much employees want to do their own personal and professional development. And there are certainly organizations that you can have them join, or there are courses, perhaps you could cover some of the costs for them to take to continue to grow their skill set. I was talking to a woman who is the head of people for one of Atlanta's fast growing companies, and I loved the idea around how they did professional development in the very early days. Now they're over 200 employees now, but 5 years ago they weren't that size. But they did a monthly book club where everyone in the company read the same book. It may have been thematic on something around personal development, something around what the company needed to do. It could be something around their industry. The cost to the company was a price of a book per employee, but it really was a team building exercise. At the same time, it was a professional development exercise. And I use that example because it's low cost, it's very clever, and certainly any startup company can do that, and it has real value and benefit.
Well, I think the moral there is there's a lot of levers that you can pull, and it really depends on the role and the candidate. Some are going to be motivated by different factors, but career growth, other types of benefits, flexibility, all of that goes into a robust package and
Absolutely.
is a way to hire and retain your employees.
Absolutely.
Well, Jane, thank you for setting the stage. We're going to invite you back during Q&A, but really this helps set the tone of what we're seeing in the market and give our startups a few great tips to think about.
Thank you.
Excellent. So now I'm going to invite up Adwait Joshi, who's the chief seer at Data Seers. He's going to bring more of an entrepreneur and startup lens to the conversation. So Data Seers is a fintech company that provides software tools to the banking and payments industry to help with compliance, fraud detection, analytics, and other use cases. So I hope I got that right.
You sure did. You sure did.
Excellent. Well, Adwait, why don't you just tell us a little bit about the Data Seers story? When did you start? How big are you today? And take us through a little bit of that growth journey that you've been on.
Absolutely. So like you said, the focus for us was payments and financial services. That includes banks, that includes credit unions, that includes fintechs. And as they are trying to innovate and as they innovate through all these different channels, payments are becoming easier, faster. You don't have to think about how you want to pay somebody. There's always like 5 different ways, and cash is usually not one of them these days. Most people don't carry cash anymore. Payments have become complex, and so has fraud detection and compliance issues. You are seeing it all over the place. We saw it with crypto. We are seeing it with other payment companies and so on and so forth. So we saw an opportunity to do something in this industry because at the time I thought that there was a way to take control of those data assets because everything is in the data. That's like taking somebody's blood, doing an analysis and telling them, well, you should have high cholesterol or you're sick or you're going to be sick, whatever, right? So we looked at that, and hence we coined the term taming the data demon, right? We trademarked that term because it's literally a big mess and people have a hard time controlling that. So in 2017, I started this company with literally an idea that there was an opportunity out there in the market. I spoke to my then mentor and I said, if I did this, do you think that the market would be receptive? And they said, yes, they absolutely would be receptive and they would actually react really well to this. And so we kind of started there. We took an unconventional approach. We did not start the company with any seed funding at all. In fact, we have never raised any money and continued to grow based on a pure market need. It was very important we understood what the market wanted, what the market was ready to pay for, and how to package the solution so that they get what they're looking for and pay for it, right? So now we are about 100 employees. We have 62 or so here in the US and 40 employees or so in India. We are headquartered in Alpharetta and another office in Mumbai, and our entire growth has been organic.
Well, that's a great story and a lot accomplished in just about 5 years. So congrats to you.
Thank you.
I want to help us think about how you grew the organization over time. So it started as you. How did you think about, those first few hires that you made? Who did you prioritize, and when did you know it was the right time to bring them on board?
It's a great question because all of us make mistakes and do things and then react to it. So our very first hire obviously was an engineer. I needed somebody to start coding because I had written the initial code and it was getting some traction. And I was like, I can't keep this up. I have to wear the CEO hat. I can't be coding anymore. So of course, the first hire was an engineer. And then from there, we made our first mistake and hired a salesperson immediately, right? And we were like, oh my God, let's go sell this product. And it was putting a cart before the horse. We learned from those mistakes and we parted ways on good terms at the time saying, you know what, you're a great person, but the timing's not right for us. That person actually joined us back a month ago, right? Now as a different company, now with all these things behind them, all the references, all the clients, the entire software being ready and so on and so forth. But back in the day, we focused on recruiting mainly engineering and engineers because we knew that if we don't have a product and if we don't keep up the product pieces, then nobody's going to buy. And then when we hit that mix of, okay, now I have enough revenue, and now I can build and bring on other types of people. We started focusing on having dedicated operations teams, right? Whether it is finance, whether it is customer success, whether it is implementations, cyber, and all of those teams came over. Up until then, a lot of us were wearing multiple hats, and it works, but it doesn't work forever. It's good at the time, but then you have to start showing separation of duties. And then everything else kind of came naturally because we scaled all of our organizations pretty evenly for that matter. Yes, we are a developer heavy organization, but we still continue adding support in other organizations as and when needed.
That's really helpful. So when you were adding these new roles over time, were there any metrics or formulas that helped you determine now is the time to hire, now is that time to do that next phase of growth? And how were you confident that you'd have, the revenue and the financials behind it to support those new roles?
Yep. And that's a fine mix. The revenue and financials have to add up to whatever you're adding. So sometimes you have to look forward and say, okay, I'm going to have X amount of business and I need these many people to support them, and they won't be trained for about 90 days, at least at the minimum. So I have to front the money and then I have to get that in hopes of signing up the business. It's a lot of financial modeling. I'm a math guy, I'm a data scientist myself. So I'm able to do a lot of that modeling and projections pretty accurately. We have a good understanding of what's realistic and what's unrealistic, right? Can I add these 6 clients, in the next 3 months, right? We have a good idea, a very high probability of doing that. And then once we look at that, generally what ends up happening is when everybody's plate is full and things start getting dropped because nobody could get to it, it's a good time to say, okay, maybe we should have another person because my engineering is not getting through all of their list of things to do in X amount of time. Or the implementation team slowing down because everybody's plate is full and they're not able to work. Okay, the time to add that, right? So some we outsource, some we have in-house, and that's how we look at it. It's like, what are we missing out on, and what can we not do, and can I go and recruit somebody for that so that I can now do it?
Excellent. And so you've grown. I mean, you mentioned you're almost 100 people now. So I'm curious, do you have a people or an HR person? And when did you determine it was important to bring on that expertise in-house?
Yep. So we definitely have an HR person. We actually have 2. We have one here in the US. We have one in India because we have 2 offices and we have to run them independently. And rules and laws are different. So we brought in an HR person right when we hit about 15, 20 employees in the US. And the reason why we hit that and we hired that is because what I had always been keeping an eye out on is, when will I hit 50 employees? Because I know that the moment I hit 50 employees, the rules change, the laws change, there are things that you have to do differently and so on and so forth. Up until then, you're really a small business, and you can get away with a lot of things. Now things have to be more formal. You have to have your labor law posters in your kitchen. We are an in-person office, so everybody works here, like Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, pretty much everybody's here. So we made that decision when we could see ourselves within the next 1 year going past that 50 count. And at that time, we had to recruit somebody, and we had to go through a couple of different HR people, because it's hard to find a good HR person who understands your culture, who understands your business, who is committed to the organization and the organizational growth, and they're going to support you. Because sometimes, they are the ones who are right there saying, hey, you're making a mistake, don't do this or don't do that. And some people are scared to say that to, founders and C-level executives, right? So you're almost hiring an antagonist on the other side, but not really an antagonist. They're really your partner on the other side, right? So we hired, our first HR 2 years ago. And then, of course, in India, you have to have an HR pretty much immediately when you start a company because of different rules. And now we have an in-house talent team, right? For the last 18 months, we have had in-house people who have been, dialing phones and emailing people, recruiting them, and so on and so forth. So that team is now, growing. In fact, we have thought through this that, okay, now our HR is busy. So our HR needs an assistant who can do a lot of other things now. So it's that's how we look at it. And that's how we grow our organization.
That's great. So you're doing your own in-house talent recruiting and development. And so, Jane mentioned earlier a little bit about what are some of those key components that attracts a candidate. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you're seeing in terms of your ability to attract that talent. What are some of the things that are working for you, and maybe what are some of the challenges that you're facing right now?
Yeah, so when I usually interview people, what attracts them most is the whiskey behind me. I'm just kidding. So, we have a lot of these people ask the same questions. I mean, we have taken a untraditional approach of going and recruiting at a college level and getting them from colleges and training them and creating that next level talent. And what we have found is, if you are not afraid of doing that, knowing that you have to have the right support structure in place for that, which doesn't work for everybody, you'll actually end up having people that are extremely smart, highly efficient, and then you'll build that loyalty and the ownership at a very early stage, because you can then grow them into different types of roles within the organization. What that means for us is we are not afraid of bringing people from different countries and different cultures and blending them together, and giving them the opportunity to be here. With what that means is getting their H-1Bs, getting their L-1As, getting their green cards done. And although that's not what we heavily focus on, we are saying that we won't say no to you because of you need an H-1B. Because I came here in this country 22 years ago to go to school, and I was on a visa. If somebody had not taken that chance on me, I wouldn't be here today doing what I'm doing. So some of these people, I'm hoping that in the future, they start their own business, and they need that opportunity. They need that ladder. They need that stepping stone. And I made a decision many years ago that I'm going to be that stepping stone. I'm going to let them be and let them do things that I did not have the opportunity back in the day. So that helps a lot. Also, going out and looking at people, what we tell them is, Jane mentioned earlier, is people's expectations these days are unrealistic. We had an employee, back in the day, or a couple of employees that left because somebody was willing to pay them 2x and 3x salaries than what we were paying. And now they're out of jobs, right? Because they were laid off. And the challenge that we tell them is that's the risk you take. There is a risk and there is a reward, and you have to measure the risk and the reward. In a startup environment, the reward is a little bit different. And business owners and all of us understand the difference between an established company and a startup. But most people who are interviewing from a job level don't know that difference. They don't know what is it like working for a startup. All they're looking for is, okay, is my paycheck big enough that I can make a big impact? And I always tell them that you have to look at total comp and not a paycheck only, because you may have a higher salary, but how much are you paying out of pocket for health insurance? And what does your 401k look like? I mean, we don't want our stocks to be at $300 and then join the company a year later, the stock is at $20. That stock options are worth nothing. A startup, has the potential of the stock options growing, and that generally thought process comes from people who have been around a lot more. So we have phenomenal benefits that we offer. We have an on-site gym, we have showers here, we have a bike path, we have bike rentals, we have a great team. We do a lot of team events, we do a lot of training, we do a lot of coaching, we do a lot of, all of our people have unlimited access to get certifications. We have a program where they can actually not only get the certification and the company will pay for it, but that then comes with a pay increase because you actually got certified in your field of work. So there's a lot of things that we provide these, teammates is what I call it, or shipmates, that other people don't. So yes, our paycheck may not be as big as Google and Microsoft, but whatever you are doing is going to be a direct impact. I'll give you a simple example. I have a bunch of kids here from KSU that work for us, and they started writing a piece of code for a message type called 20022, which is what we use in real-time payments. And they were like writing the code, not realizing what they were doing. And I went to them and I said, do you realize that if you finish this code, you have effectively implemented Zelle? And they looked at me and they're like, what? It's like, yeah, what you're coding for is basically Zelle. And that's when they were like, holy crap, we can make such a big impact that the code that we are writing will allow every individual to transfer money instantaneously, right? So the fun things that we do here in this company is what get them here. And you have to have a different type of mentality. You have learning experience. In a startup, you learn the most. In larger organizations, your growth may be shunted by, if you have a bad manager, you might make $200,000, $300,000 a year, but if you have a bad manager and who's scared of you, he's never going to let you climb. In a startup environment, that doesn't happen. We have so many people who are young and smart, and they're able to just unleash their potential. So that's what we look for. That's what we offer as an organization, and of course the whiskey. But that's what gets the people to come work for us here.
Well, I think there were so many good nuggets in that. And in so many ways, it reiterates what Jane said earlier, right? It's not just about the comp, it's about the purpose, it's about the development opportunities. But I think what's really important and the big takeaway for any entrepreneurs is be transparent and think about that value proposition that you can offer. Really be intentional about how you communicate that to candidates in a very specific way. So really appreciate all that insight. And I'm sure we'll have more questions for you during Q&A. So thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. So our last guest today is going to talk to us about preparing some of that young talent and what he's seen from the talent perspective. So I'm really excited. We have Ernest Holmes, who is the president and co-founder of Codehouse. So Codehouse is a nonprofit organization that is cultivating that strong talent pipeline between students of color and technology companies. So they're doing a lot of work to close that diversity gap. And I'm sure he's going to tell us more about how they do that. So Ernest, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Thanks for the invite. I'm glad to be here for sure. Yeah, but Codehouse is, it's been a journey, I can say that, right? I think we're almost coming up on 4 years in October for Codehouse. And I like to share what Codehouse is, well, I share my story as well, because I think it's important. But I start off, I'm a proud graduate of Morehouse College, class of 2019, studied computer science and mathematics. And while I was at Morehouse, I actually was privileged enough to do 3 internships with Google. So software engineering internships over in California, amazing experience, all the free food, all the glitz and gam, like Edwin was just talking about. But the one thing that was very clear to me was the fact that there was a lack of people that looked like me, not only at Google, but over in the Silicon Valley in general, right? And I wanted to leave Morehouse with basically me a legacy, like one final event, because I was always asked to talk as a Black man what's like being in tech to middle schools and high schools. And I wanted to do an event on my own. And so I came together with my sister, who's a professor at Spelman College now, JC Holmes, and Tavis Thompson, who's our third co-founder, works at Zillow. And we're still in college at the time, but we put together this event called Tech Exposure Day, where we brought 150 million high school students to campus, expose them to HBCUs, but really to expose them to opportunities in tech. And we had companies like, of course, Google, Microsoft, Dell, IBM, all these different big entities with products that these students use on a day-to-day basis. But more importantly, these students got to see what a Black engineer looks like, what a Hispanic designer looks like. They got to see people that look like them right there, right? And then they also got to meet HBCU students so they can start putting the dots together, like, wow, I can go to a Morehouse and end up at a Google, right? And it was supposed to be a one-day kind of event. But we decided after I graduated and I moved out to Oakland to work at Google as a software engineer, that this work was important enough to keep it going. And so that was October 2019. We made it to a 501c3 nonprofit. And since then, we did a second event for 400 students. We did it again for 2,000 students virtually during COVID. Recently, as of 2 weeks ago, we actually ran out the Mercedes-Benz Stadium and had over 3,000 students from high schools and middle schools, 65 different metropolitan Atlanta schools represented, and 50 different tech companies and STEM organizations and nonprofits there, right on the field in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium for a day to really get them excited about tech. But the other part, which I think we could talk about a little bit more here, is we felt like we could have more impact with the work that we were doing. And we're really focused on that gap between high school and college, because we saw that the attrition rates were not the best for students persisting in careers in computer science and technical related fields in college. So we basically made the program that we wish we had when we were going through college. We called it the Codehouse Scholars Initiative. And basically, it's a wraparound support model program hitting on a few different pain points. One, students were dropping out of the CS majors because they just couldn't afford school anymore. Two, they were dropping out of the CS majors because they just weren't exposed to it earlier on. And like when you're adjusting to college and you're doing this hard major, it's a lot going on your freshman year. And then three, sometimes when you're doing it alone and you don't have a community of support around you, it's terrifying, right? So you want to have people they can relate to and work with you. And so the Scholars Initiative has those three parts. The first part is the $20,000 in scholarships for each student. The second part is a 4-week summer bridge program that they do before they even get to college, so we can build their technical and professional development skills and a lot of industry exposure. And then thirdly is the mentorship program. So throughout their freshman year, they get a industry mentor from a company like PayPal or Google or Microsoft, guide them on the professional side. And then they get like a junior or senior in college to act like a big brother, big sister for that near peer mentorship model. And we started that 2 years ago in 2020 and wound up getting a grant from PayPal to do it for 1.5 million. Brought in 29 scholars, started it right here in Atlanta with the AEC, so Morehouse, Spelman, and Clark Atlanta University. And now we're at the point where we raised over $4 million for this work. We have 72 scholars, and hopefully soon we're going to be bringing more scholars. Very, very soon, I should say.
Well, that's an amazing story. And I mean, you've really highlighted the fact that it's important to cultivate that young talent, especially here locally, and keeping them here locally. Adwait mentioned, he likes to tap into college students and recruit right out of school as a really great form to seed his business. And so what are you seeing? I mean, you work with a lot of these students, you're exposing them to tech. There's probably at this point starting to graduate or get to that point where they're looking to take on new roles. How are they looking at their different opportunities that they have in front of them? Obviously you mentioned a lot of big tech, but how are graduates also thinking about a startup or other type of tech firm as an opportunity?
Right. And I think right now is a very timely conversation. I was actually offered the position to help lead or co-lead the 10-day startup competition for Spelman College. So it's actually right now they have 10 days to make a startup from idea to fruition, and they'll be pitching on next Thursday. And the one thing I can say that rings true through that competition, through Codehouse, is that the talent is there. Like, these students are eager, they're willing to learn, they are passionate about learning. I get texts and messages in our Discord all the time, like different wins that they have, whether it's internships or competitions that they're competing in. So the students are willing to learn. It's just more about figuring out what pathway they want to go through, right? I think one thing that is eye-opening with all the tech layoffs is that, of course, with Codehouse, like all our major supporters and sponsors are big tech companies, and we tell them like that, if that is where you want to go, that is great. I would love for you to be a coworker with me at Google, because I still work at Google full time too, right? But if you want to go on the entrepreneurship route, there are so many like opportunities to do so as well. And these students are also coming up with a lot of amazing new ideas that like I don't even think about, right? Like I'm starting to feel like the old head and I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that, right? So I think it's an exciting time for them because like they realize that big tech is great and that it feels more achievable for them, right? But now they can also explore their own ventures and their own ideas on the entrepreneurship route as well.
And what opportunities do you think there are for existing startups like the data seers of the world to get in front of some of these students and cultivate some of those relationships earlier on, so that they can be a strong pipeline into their companies?
Right. And I think this is a great middle ground where the one thing that, and just to give a little more background, I actually was able to teach at Morehouse College last fall 2021 through Google. It's a program we have called Google in Residence. And I think I'm a product of the department. So, and, I get to work with so many different HBCU departments. They're amazing, but they are still limited with how many resources they have, right? So we don't have robust programs to teach students React.js or Flutter or any like these cool frameworks that are very valuable skill sets that these students really learn those on the job, like whether for internships or side projects on the side, right? So I think the unique perspective that startups can bring, if you're using any of those cool technologies to make your startup more robust, that is a great skill set for those students to learn. Now the caveat is they may not have that much experience in it, right? So it's more of a nurturing process than like, hey, we're bringing someone in to be our Flutter person because they're going to be the expert in Flutter. It's like, no, you're almost like teaching them Flutter while they're on the job. But one thing I will say, and one thing that we advocate a lot with Codehouse is like, you need to be scrappy. You need to be able to learn on the job, just like I had to do when I did my internships and work at Google, right? So it's an interesting dynamic, but if you're willing and if you have the capacity to be nurturing and to be patient with the students, that they will soak up every opportunity to do so.
And we're in mid-March right now. The end of the school year is upon us. Are startups too late, or do they still have time to recruit some great students for summer internships?
There is always time to recruit talent, right? I think that's the biggest reason why we're focused with Codehouse on the gap between high school and college is because a lot of students don't realize, like, for someone like me who's from Jersey, like you move down to Atlanta, you're on the new scene, like, exploring what Atlanta looks like, you're making new friends, figuring out what it's like living away from home, while at the same time, like Google's application opens up in September. Microsoft's application opens up in August sometimes. Like all these major tech companies who have opportunities specifically for freshmen are opening it up in the fall, right? Early fall. So a lot of students are overwhelmed just trying to figure out how to adjust to college life, that sometimes they miss out on those opportunities, not meaning that they're bad candidates. And that's where I think that opportunity lies, is for those students who, and after a few semesters in college, like they have some better technical skill sets that will be valuable for the startups as well. So it's actually the perfect time to pick up some of those talent, especially with the lack of roles being open in tech right now, to get some of these students to maybe encourage them to be in the more of the entrepreneurship space for sure.
Well, excellent. Well, Ernest, thank you for your perspective. We're going to transition now to Q&A. So please stay on camera, and I'm going to invite Jane and Adwait to come back on. And for anybody who still has existing questions, feel free to drop them into our Q&A box, and I'm going to pick some of those questions out right now. So for our panel, whoever wants to jump in here, we've had a lot of questions going back to the question around compensation and especially around equity awards. So there's a couple questions there about what are some of the most common forms of equity awards, a mix of options, stock, RSUs. And what in particular are Atlanta startups using? What are you seeing that's most common? And then what are maybe some of the challenges of implementing those compensation programs?
I can take that one because I'm living this today. So if you are looking to work with a startup or for a startup, or if you're a startup hiring your next team, you always have to have an equity option in place. You have to. You have no choice. And the reason why I say that you have no choice is because at that stage, when you're still being called as a startup, there is risk on both sides. Your organization could fail, and that person is actually taking that job thinking that you're going to succeed. So they're giving you literally their blood, sweat, and tears in many ways. So having options, equity, and all of that is important. That's something that everybody should consider. Certainly, we offer that as a part of our package, and that is often used to offset some of the salary, right? Because the way these options will grow or the stock values grows in an early stage startup is very different than a big organization where the stock could tumble because of one small mistake that somebody makes and so on and so forth, or the company doesn't cease to exist because of the people making mistakes like that. In the startup world, it's very important to do that from early stage. Now, whether it's RSU, whether it's options, whether it's common stock, whether it's real equity, that really depends upon the organization and how complex you want to get. In our case, I'll give an example. In our case, we are actually registered as an S Corp. We are not even a C Corp because we never raised money, right? So we have the benefit of the tax shelter. In an S Corp, you don't want to be giving out a ton of K1s, right? I mean, everybody files their taxes by April 15th for sure. Well, business owners don't. They always extend their taxes because there's so much to figure out. Now, which means that you would have to extend your taxes as well if you were a stock owner in our company, because you have to wait for that K1 to show up. So we give options, right? So you have an option to buy the stock. And it's a net exercise option for us, which means if you're done with the company, you're not going to be holding on to the stock forever, because then that's when things can get complex for you to go and recover those, and somebody's willing to share, not willing to share, or not willing to sell it back. So for us, that has worked really, really well. We use an online system to keep track of, like Carta. So you can go in and look at what my stock options are worth today and how they have grown over a period of time. And that kind of gives them, oh, wow, I could make X amount of money, if I sell these stock options when they vest, and so on and so forth. So we use that a lot. Our people, we are in that way, we are an employee-owned company, if you think about it, because there is no external shareholders.
That's a helpful example. And then just to add on to that, there is a question around advisory board members. So sometimes when you're really early in a business, you might have some experts that are not working for you full time, but are advisors. But in order for them to give you some of their expertise, they do want to be compensated. So how do you, either Jane or Adway, how do you guys think about that? And do you recommend that as a course of action?
Well, I can tell you from my experience what I have done. You absolutely have to have advisory members and a board as early as you can, because that board and that those advisors are going to be crucial to help you grow your company. And as an exchange for that, you are going to give them some stock options. Early startups typically will not give cash compensation to these people. And you should not be recruiting anybody on your board at that early stage who wants that cash compensation. Because a true advisor, a true board member is going to say, you need to conserve cash at this stage. You shouldn't be paying me. You should be paying your employees, right? So they're going to come in and they're going to work on a future hope that, hey, if I help you, you're going to grow and I will make my money eventually, right? So they're vested in your interest, in your company's best interest. And second is, I've seen anywhere from 1/3% to 1% of your options going to board members. It really depends upon what outstanding shares do you have, what valuation you bring them in on, and so on and so forth. But that's what I have seen commonly done. I don't know, Jane has obviously seen more than I have.
No, that's exactly the right amount, is somewhere probably less than 1%. And one tactic I've always used when advisory board members are looking for a greater equity share than that, whether it's equity or options, is there are reports out there that support that the amount you're offering them is what's current in the market. And the final thing I'll say is there's a difference between a member of the board, the board of directors, and the advisory board. And the board of directors does have a fiduciary responsibility, and there's a lot of other paperwork and other things you need to do with them, whether you compensate them or not. With an advisory board, it's an informal relationship. It doesn't need to be permanent. You may need an advisor to help you through a particular activity. And then when you've completed that activity, you kind of don't need that advisor anymore. It doesn't mean that you haven't given them some options or compensated them, but it just means you don't necessarily need to keep them permanently on your board of advisors. It can be a very dynamic group of people. But to Adwait's point, you don't have to compensate them. But if they're doing real work for you, making introductions, doing the things you need them to do, it is nice to offer them some of the future upside in your company. So.
Thank you both for that perspective. The next question is for Ernest, and we have someone who's wondering if you do remote projects and can the work that you do extend beyond the walls of Atlanta?
Yeah, so with the Google, last year, Google gave us $1 million to expand our work to actually North Carolina and DC, to Howard University in North Carolina, A&T. And there's been a lot of interest to actually expand it to new cities and new areas. It's funny because like people think nonprofit sometimes, and like I very much so need to think like a startup and think about like, I have like all the same kind of trials and tribulations of building a team and thinking where our revenue is going to be coming from and all that good stuff as well. So I'm very big on proof of concept before I expand. So if it makes sense, definitely we'll consider it. And hopefully we have some announcements soon about where we're going to be expanding next.
Excellent. And I'm sure if people are interested, they can reach out to you and talk about any potential pilots and expansions.
Sure thing. I'll drop the website in the chat.
Excellent. Well, I think we could keep going for another 20, 30 minutes. This has been really insightful, but we are on the hour. So I do want to say thank you. Thank you to our speakers. You had amazing insights, and I think we're very helpful for the Atlanta startup ecosystem here today. I again want to say thank you to our sponsors who made today possible, and then also to the Startup Atlanta team who helped plan and execute today's event. So thank you all. I do hope that we'll see everyone again on May 24th. Just a reminder, we'll be back with a Scale and ATL webinar talking about alternative financing. So find out more about ways you can finance your business. So with that, thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll be seeing you soon.